So in this lesson, what we're going to do is have a look at the concept of traditional conservatism. This is the conservatism that we explored a little bit in the first couple of lessons, where we are talking about a reaction to radical political change, things like the French Revolution, for example. And we're going to explore things like that by focusing specifically on one of the key thinkers for conservatism, which is Edmund Burke. So, as an introduction, traditional conservatism differs increasingly from the more modern variations of conservatism. So by more modern, we can explore ideas such as one nation conservatism, which we'll look at in the next lesson, one nation conservatism, as well as the new right conservatism. And you can also tangentially relate conservatism to other ideologies, things like neoliberalism, okay, and also libertarianism. Now, these I'm going to put in a separate bubble because there's some debate and argument as to what extent these qualify as conservative positions. However, generally speaking, neoliberalism and libertarian thought tend to align more closely with the political platforms and the positions of modern conservative parties in the world today. So the traditional conservatism we're going to be examining specifically relates to that in response of specifically the French Revolution. Okay, we've already touched upon Thomas Hobbes and his influence on conservative thought, because his influence was relating to his reactions to the English Civil War and the English Revolution. But like what I will always say, and like I've said in the last couple of videos, Thomas Hobbes, it would be incorrect to describe Thomas Hobbes as a conservative, because conservatism didn't actually exist at the time he was writing. So we're going to outline a number of principles before looking at our second key thinker of the conservative thought section, which is Edmund Burke. So let's have a look at a number of principles of conservatism. So we've got a few here that, for some reason, it seems that the listing didn't continue. So we've got 4 specifically different principles of conservatism right here. And the first one is the, quote, preservation of hierarchy. So traditional conservatives believes that the most organic, most natural part of society, or at least the most natural state of society, so the natural state of society is that of a hierarchical structure, where we have people that are at the top of this hierarchy, and then you've got lower down people as well that are lower down in this hierarchy. Now, this obviously will contrast slightly to an extent with socialism when we look at that, but it will definitely contrast when we look at anarchism, because anarchism is almost a reaction to the concept of hierarchy. So this is the first belief within traditional conservatism, that there does exist this hierarchy in society, and that the most natural state of society is one which is hierarchical in nature. The second principle is one that is a little bit related to that of liberalism, and this is the concept of freedom. Okay, there is an emphasis placed on freedom when it comes to conservative thought. So the key difference is that while there is an emphasis placed on freedom, traditional conservatism recognizes that limits to freedom may be necessary to ensure a kind of freedom for all. And we will look at some examples of that when we explore some more modern versions of conservatism. The third one is one that I think should be highlighted the most when it comes to traditional conservatism, and this is the concept, and this is the quote, okay, the principle of change to conserve, okay, changing to conserve. And technically these two things are almost contradictory in nature, but this is the belief that things in society and through government and in politics should change. Okay, conservatism isn't necessarily an ideology that states that there shouldn't be any change at all within society. Conservatism is just the viewpoint that change has to be slow, it has to be gradual, okay, and whatever change happens, it must respect the traditions and traditionalism that existed in society beforehand, okay. So there must be changes within society, but these changes must conserve traditional values. Conserve, that's a V. Conserve traditional values. Traditional values. Okay. And then we've got this fourth principle, which is quite interesting. And this is one that you can actually link a little bit to the thought processes of this lady here, Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister. Okay, she's talked a lot about conservative ideology as well, and she actually has made references a few times in the past to the concept of paternalism within conservatism. So the belief that government should act like a father, and that the subjects, act like the children. And as such, the government should work in the best interests of its subjects. So the government should work for the people that it's supposed to serve. But it also knows better. It makes reference to the fact that the government knows better, knows what people believe, what people should want and should need. Now, this kind of concept of the relationship between the state and the people, it's very, very, very different to that of liberalism. Now, don't forget that within liberalism, you've got the concept of government by consent, okay, and limited government. The government should only be allowed to be legitimate. A legitimate government can only exist by consent of the people that elect it and bring it into bring it into power. And also, with that being said, you have to have things like a constitution and constitutionalism to try and limit, to try and pull back and hold back government from, progressing too far and, and infringing on rights. Now, this is the viewpoint of the relationship between the government and the state within a liberal framework is one which is a little bit different, a lot different, to this conservative view. The view that the government is like the father and that the government knows best, okay, and that the subjects acts in the best interest of the subjects, but that it also knows better. It knows what it knows what would be the best outcome for its subjects. Something that is very, very different to a liberal framework. So let's have a look at specifically an example of this. We're going to look at an example of a key thinker who is Edmund Burke. Okay, and now Edmund Burke is not pictured here. This is not Edmund Burke. I believe this is Peel. Just to note that the images in all of these presentations don't necessarily relate to the subject, the content within the subject. They're just there to guide the viewer, down through the presentation. So this is not Edmund Burke. I felt the need to put that in brackets there because obviously this isn't Edmund Burke. So you just need to make sure that was the case. So Edmund Burke, who is not pictured here, was one of the first key thinkers when it comes to traditional conservatism. Okay, let me just reverse that there. Traditional conservatism. He was one of the first traditional conservatives. He wrote a number of things relating to conservatism. He wrote a number of different treatises and a number of different books, one of which I have on my shelf up there, I believe. On the Evils of Revolution is one of his particular works. So, obviously, from the title of the book that I've just referenced, On the Evils of Revolution, which I believe was a letter Edmund Burke had written that has been fashioned into a book, you can sort of get a picture of Edmund Burke's outlook on different forms of revolutionary action. If he's titling a letter and subsequently a book, quote, On the Evils of Revolution, he doesn't have a very particularly fond, a particularly positive outlook on the concept of revolutions. Now, his conservative belief came out of his reactions to the American Revolution and also the French Revolution. Now, what's really interesting is that, generally speaking, Burke supported the American Revolution. He supported the Americans' right to freedom and freedom from taxation. which was one of the key reasons why the American Revolution took place. So we can't forget, if we go back to our American history, the formation of the United States of America came out. One of the reasons was that Parliament wanted to tax the colonies without giving them representation in Parliament. And the colonies responded by saying the famous mantra, no taxation without representation. So Burke actually supported the American Revolution. He believed it was an example of changing to conserve, because he believed that the fundamental freedoms of man existed before the concept of monarchy. So I'm just going to write that here. This is not a quote from Burke, this is just me summarizing. We've got man before monarchy. So this is the conceptual belief that the monarchy, i.e. the English monarchy, George III, his will did not outrule that of the freedoms of the American colonists, and so the revolution itself was an example of changing to conserve. So this is one of his ideas. However, his response to the French Revolution was very, very different. And this is partly due to the changing, the differences between the revolutions. Some people might argue that Edmund Burke's positions on America and France in terms of their revolutions is actually quite counterintuitive and contradictory, but you can obviously support his argument by suggesting that these two revolutions were obviously very, very different. And Burke argued against the French Revolution partly on the grounds that it was destroying the traditional and existing institutions. And this is true, the institutions of monarchy, for example. The American Revolution didn't destroy the English monarchy. It simply simply broke away from the English monarchy. And also, within the French Revolution, there was a heavy critique of by Burke of the concept of equality. And we know that this is the case because traditional conservatives believe that the most natural state of society is that of a hierarchy. So a kind of equality for all is something that kind of is counterintuitive to this concept of hierarchy. So the natural state of society, as we've already mentioned, so the natural state of society is that which is almost contradictory with the view, the traditional understanding of equality. Well, I've written it there, look. So from this we can see where Edmund Burke's philosophy comes from, and in the next lesson we're going to look at how this was built upon in the more modern era, specifically the late 1800s and early 1900s, looking specifically at Benjamin Disraeli and his conception of one nation conservatism. So we're talking about in the next lesson the concept of one nation conservatism, and then in the final lesson on the history we are going to explore the concept of the new right, conservative thoughts. And so we can really, again, like I mentioned in the last video, we can really trace back these conservative ideas all the way back to this traditional viewpoint, this traditional state, specifically relating to Edmund Burke.